I'm a proud Scottish Pakistani Muslim. My faith, my nationality, my ethnicity aren't at odds with each other. In fact, during the holy month of Ramadan, you'll often find me opening up my fast with a spicy curry and a cold can of Anum brew. Yet for Muslims across Scotland and the UK, it can still feel like we're being spoken about rather than being listened to. Our communities are visible in classrooms, councils, businesses and parliaments, but are Muslims treated like a headline or a debate rather than part of the national story? Welcome to the DemocraTEA podcast, where we spill the tea on people, power and politics. My name is Anum. At 28, I became one of the youngest members of Parliament elected to Westminster. From the Houses of Parliament to protests on the street, I've seen up close how power works and how often it doesn't. That's why I've started this podcast. It's unfiltered, unapologetic and disruptive. We go behind the headlines and behind the sound bites to challenge the status quo. I'm not a journalist, and this isn't just another political podcast. This is about the conversations that impact all of us, the conversations that don't always make the headlines, but shape how we live, work and show up in the world. We'll talk about politics. We'll also look at power, identity, faith, equality and everything in between. Real stories, real people, real talk. Today I'm joined by Muhbeen Hussain, who was recently awarded an MBE for Community Cohesion and Integration, but that excitement didn't actually last that long because he was then publicly defamed by the far right. Muhbeen has seen firsthand what it's like to be a Muslim in public life and the backlash that often comes with it. In this episode we'll talk about the pressures of representation and the politics of being patriotic. We'll also explore how Muslims can better engage with politics to meet the challenges ahead. For example, whether independence or your party are truly the answer. And before we dive in, this is our very first season, so your support means the world. After you've had a listen, I'd love to know what you think. Does it feel like loyalty seems to have conditions attached, or are there better ways that Muslims can engage in politics? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this episode with a friend, and don't forget to hit subscribe so we can keep inviting guests to spill the tea on people, power and politics. So Muhbeen, I am drinking peppermint tea today because it's actually my go-to drink. What about you?
It's English breakfast tea, but my go-to, I think, with tea is Chaiwala, to be honest. It's not here, so I'll have to take English breakfast tea, which is probably my second option.
Chaiwala feels really high in sugar.
Probably is, but sometimes you've got to have a nice treat, I guess.
Yeah, the question then is, can you make chai?
Yeah, I can, but not as good as my wife, actually, but I think I do a decent job. And then when she comes in pitching, I think that helps.
So if I think of words like integration, community cohesion, these are often buzzwords that are thrown around about by politicians, but actually they're words that have been integral to your political core really from a young age. What was driving you back then?
I think, look, growing up as a British Muslim, actually pre-9/11, 7/7, is more about our ethnic identities. As a British Asian growing up, there's always that kind of barrier. People grow up facing racism. You kind of living multiple lives or kind of fighting the challenges. And growing up, I realized actually there wasn't a challenge between my faith and my ethnicity and my nationality. I felt that it was all something that I could have, but I felt that there were challenges that people faced. And I thought, you got to speak about that. You got to bring people together, and through conversations and through dialogue, people find that we actually have more in common. And there is a lot that we have in common, but we just don't have those conversations.
What do you mean by challenges that people were facing?
I think, look, no doubt, as a British Muslim growing up after 9/11, 7/7, you've realised the challenges. You know, the stops at the airport, whether you're a fully British citizen or how loyal you are to this country. These are questions you have, and questions which many young people have and still have today. And I think there are real questions in society, and you have to have these conversations with people. Unless you have these conversations, people won't know how they feel, and they won't be able to kind of tackle these issues that people put out there.
Do you think these are questions that internalised Muslims ask themselves, or is it more an issue of these questions are posed to them and they're challenged about their levels of Britishness or patriotism towards the country?
I think genuinely a bit of both. I think, look, there is the racism people face. People have prejudice. People are inspired by people who are kind of pushing these ideas, but also yourself. Like I remember growing up, and this is quite unusual for me to talk about this, but I think pre the Ashes, 2005, England Ashes, that's the cricket series with Test series with Australia, I decided I'm not going to support Pakistan as my cricket team. I started supporting England, and I thought one of the reasons for that is that, look, I'm born here, I contribute here, but I wasn't contributing at the time, but this nation contributed towards me. I felt a sense of identity, a sense of loyalty. That doesn't mean I don't watch Pakistani cricket, but I felt there was a connection, and I had these kind of debates and challenges, as many young people across this country do. And at times people polarize those conversations by attacking people and making them feel like they do not belong. But at times it's about people bringing people together and say, you know what, you can have different identities, and you can have different cultures that come together to actually make you who you are, and you can still be proudly British as well.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think you and I are both of a similar age. So when 9/11 happened, I was only 9 years old, so I was relatively young. But I still felt a marked change post 9/11, just how Muslims were viewed by society. And I think it's a fair analysis to say that a lot of people have gone through some sort of identity crisis. And I feel when I look at myself, for example, like I'm very comfortable and I talk very often about being a Scottish Pakistani Muslim, like you. I mean, unlike you say you're British, I'd say I'm Scottish, but I don't think any of that is at odds with each other.
Yeah, of course.
But there is some form of identity crisis at some points for some of us, right?
Yeah, I think when people say you do not belong, and like, it's just like anything. When someone otherizes you, it's hard to feel part of something because you feel like maybe you do not belong. And a lot of people have that challenge. And when you have that challenge, people either decide, okay, you know what, I don't want to belong, or they decide that they kind of won't be proud of their identity, or they kind of actually fight back. And I think there are people across that spectrum. And I think it's important to have these conversations. It's important to say what belonging means. And people should have these conversations openly, but also in good faith, which means that we look at these issues. And I think what I found, and I've seen this from talking to past generations, that the vast majority of British people are good people. Yeah. And there are people who will always say you are part of society. And the best of British, we see it in the Olympics, we see it in the World Cup, we see it through sports, we see it in the media, we see it on everyday, in everyday life. We just don't see it in politics sometimes, and we just don't see it on the media. But in real life, people are good people, and people integrate every day, and people are part of society.
And why is there then a disparity, do you think, between how people view Muslims in real life? Because I would agree with you. I think most British people actually aren't too fussed about Muslims, but then it feels like there's this far right agenda and an agenda from some elements of the media to demonise Muslims. Why does that not marry up, the kind of British public perception and how media portrays Muslims?
I think, look, generally, we've never had these issues. Obviously 9/11, 7/7, and also the kind of stigmatization, the obsession, the over kind of emphasis on Muslims and kind of the negative portrayals of British Muslims obviously have an impact in society. It's literally non-stop. You turn on the media and you will see a negative portrayal of Muslims, and there's certain channels and certain outlets that will focus on this in bad faith. So that's the one element to it. And then you got British society. I think even talking back to our past generations, people that came from South Asia, people that migrated here in the 50s and the 60s, I speak to some elderly people and they say, when we first came to the UK, I spoke to one man and he said, I came from, Pakistan, maybe from Azad Kashmir. He landed in London and he took a bus to Middlesbrough, of all places. And he goes, when I got off at Middlesbrough, I couldn't speak a word of English. I had a piece of paper to say, this is the address I need to go to. And the bus driver, who was a white Englishman, got off the bus, the driver, and he walked him to that address. These are the people that went into the mills. These are the people that went to the steelworks. These are the people that worked in the potteries. These are the people who helped rebuild Britain after the kind of World War. And this was the hospitality that we had in Britain. People didn't speak a word of English, and this is how they welcomed them. And that's the heart of British communities. When people say there's no British values, I think there are. I think we haven't defined them, but a sense of kind of unity, inclusion, it actually exists in this island, if you can say that. And so I think sometimes when there are people, bad faith actors, organised kind of rhetoric, then obviously that has an impact on society, and we're seeing that change. It isn't as it was before, and things are turning much darker.
There's so much you've just said there, but let's unpack this kind of idea that over the years, attitudes towards Muslims have changed. Where does that stem from? Where do you think that stems from?
I think, like I said, that there's definitely bad faith actors. People who like to see the world divided. People who pit people.
What do they
one
gain out of demonising Muslims, though?
Well, I guess that's the question they have to answer. Maybe they have. And look, the idea of hate, whether it comes to anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, when it comes to stigmatizing, there's always been people across society who have chose prejudice, chose division, and they have all sorts of motives and narratives, and that's always been prevalent in society. But the point is that this is orchestrated. It's not something done on the grassroots. It's not something that is just fundamentally changing in society. It is people and instruments of power through the media, through think tanks, who will orchestrate this to actually change this narrative against British Muslims and against other communities as well. And it happens across the spectrums. Sometimes this happens against British Jews in this country, and we can see the rise in anti-Semitism and the feeling that they have. We can see this sometimes against women when it comes to their rights and other communities as well. And there are always bad faith actors, but within that, when you have this kind of rhetoric, you have radicalization. We know it as a Muslim community. I know after 9/11, 7/7, there were people who were hate preachers in the community, and people came out and challenged those hate preachers. People like Anum Chowdhury were not welcome in the mosque. People actually tackled this extremist mindset for years. But if you allow that extremism and kind of hate speech to be openly spewed on mainstream outlets or in the media or online, then people do get radicalized by it. There is an impact to it.
Are British Muslims at fault, though, as well, for not fully integrating in British society and British culture?
I think
because that's one of the levels, or one of the accusations that are levelled to Muslim communities.
Look, as a British Muslim, I always hold our community to the highest standards. As somebody who's a person of faith, somebody who believes in the message of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his message was of perfection. It was of ihsan. It was of a greater duty. It was about being the best you can in society. So I hold our communities to greater regard, and I think there are challenges, and I think sometimes we must ask ourselves, are we being the best we can? Are we holding up to that personification of the message of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And I think, you know what, sometimes we're not. That doesn't mean we should be attacked. That doesn't mean we should be demonized. That doesn't mean that's is justified for the reasons that we're facing this. But actually, people talk about how do you tackle Islamophobia? People to say, we need to tackle Islamophobia by calling out this rhetoric.
But actually, can we take a step back and say, what is Islamophobia?
Yeah. Well, Islamophobia is actually, I'm not going to get into definitions and defining it. There's probably work being done right now by the government and other outlets, and people define it in many ways. But I think on a day-to-day basis, it's a hatred, it's a prejudice, it's treating people as different. It's no different to how people treat British Jews with anti-Semitism, how they treat black and people of colour with racism. It's about the othering, about teaching people with prejudice and hatred. Which actually doesn't always lead to attacks, but it can be other profound effects. But people say, how do you tackle Islamophobia? That's a question that people have. And there are many ways to tackle Islamophobia. Yeah, you got to call this out. You got to, record hate crimes, and you have to talk about the type of attacks that are in society. But one of the ways I genuinely believe, and people can call this fluffy kind of ideas, people can say this is, all made up. But I genuinely think that one of the ways to tackle Islamophobia is by showing the best of British Muslims, about showing what our religion actually teaches people, and to put that out in practice.
But is that not already being done?
I think, look, it is being done to some extent, but I think as a community we can do much better. Are we personification of a Medinan society that the Prophet ﷺ lived in? Are we? And in some quarters we do. Like, for example, when it comes to charitable giving, British Muslims give 4 times more than the British average, and we're doing that. But I think where you see actually, there's a report actually by a think tank called Equi, which found that positive stories of British Muslims, which are the ground reality. We saw this during COVID, how we responded with mosques being kind of morgues and COVID vaccine centres, how Muslims were rushing to give people food and medicine, and to kind of being the kind of first responders. We saw all of this tackle that hatred. And look, you can say that we never should have to do this, and that's a fair point. But we're in a ground reality here. We've got orchestrated, industries who are here trying to breed division, and we have to tackle it, or things are going to get much worse. But if we show our positivity and we can up our game, then I think, despite the millions they might spend in ad campaigns and Twitter bots and, media campaigns, people on the ground will know that the nurse in the hospital, the taxi driver that drives them to school or wherever they're going, that doctor in the National Health Service, that business owner that they integrate with and work with, and that child at their school is actually just like them. And I think those are the everyday conversations that can actually make the biggest difference. And sometimes we actually don't think about it like that and neglect it.
It feels like, though, that the onus is then on British Muslims to then consistently prove that they are loyal to this country and that they belong here.
I think, look, you can say it should never have to be like that. And that's a fair argument to have. But we're talking about, I keep saying this, it's a ground reality. We have to overcome this. And there are people who do not want us to overcome this. And we have to say, how do we beat this? So we can either sit here and say, you know what, we should never have to do this. And we can see day by the day things are getting worse. Or we can do what the Prophet of Islam and the past, Muslim communities did. And they, from traders in Indonesia to people that travel around the world, they personified their faith through good action. And that convinced people that they're just like the rest in society. So I'm not saying that, as people say, well, we're to blame and we should face these attacks. Of course not. They're horrendous. The level of Islamophobia, the level of threat, the level of prejudice out there is phenomenal. But that doesn't mean that we should sit back and say, well, you know what, we don't have to. Because I think the message the Prophet, from what I take back, the Prophet, peace be upon him, is that when people respond with hatred, you respond with better, with greater love. When people show you harsh words, you show soft words. When people show you hard times, you show patience. And these are huge values that we shouldn't dismiss as just kind of soft or fluffy. These are kind of root causes and essential to our faith and our values and our upbringing as human beings.
One of the words that's really sticking out to me, you didn't necessarily say it, but something that's sticking out to me is the word integration. Yeah. But I suppose the question then is what does integration really mean? Because we've got the doctors in the NHS, we've got the people running the successful businesses, we've got people who are taxi drivers. It feels like British Muslims have integrated every level of society. We've got British Muslims who are in cabinet at UK government level. But how does that integration continue? And it feels like it's not enough.
I think sometimes, again, you have to have a very nuanced conversation. And I think one of the most difficult things is having a nuanced conversation in today's society. Whatever political idea you talk about, sometimes people like me, this is why we kind of don't talk publicly about these things, is because sadly we're seeing a rise of kind of populism. And it's people who want to swing the pendulum either to the left or to the right or whichever way you want to say it. And people want to be on teams. And it's not about being on teams or sides. It's not like I'm a Man United fan, so I have to hate Liverpool, despite whatever happens in the, in the Premier League or whatever else. It's about actually having a nuanced conversation. There are people who use integration just to attack communities. They use it because to get into power. They use it for kind of stoke up hatred and push a right-wing agenda. There are those people, and you cannot ignore that. But on the other hand, you can have a conversation and say, okay, you know what? Muslims are integrated and you know what, people are integrating more. Integration means different things on different levels. Working class British people probably integrate on different levels to people in Cambridgeshire and people in different parts of the UK. And I think it's okay to have this conversation in a fair-minded way and kind of, look, I think in one way it allows our community to say, okay, look, how do we better ourselves? We've got this many doctors and this many nurses and these people in professionals, whatever professions they are. How do we upgrade our society? We have challenges. There are challenges in the prison system. There's challenges with Pakistani boys in education. There's challenges in all sorts of crimes, including, sexual exploitation. And I think whilst it's not the bigger picture and it's not the entire picture, we should be saying how do we kind of challenge ourselves to better ourselves. This is within a community, not being battered, not being blamed, not being kind of made as if this is the entire issue, but just to improve ourselves, to kind of better ourselves and improve in society.
It sometimes feels like communities don't want to have those conversations internally, though, because they're having to consistently present a united front to other communities. So it does make it somewhat difficult to have those conversations, which are really, really important conversations to have.
No, I think you're right. I think, look, these are brave and challenging conversations. I know when I led, and in a community like Rotherham, we led the first ever demonstration against grooming gangs, those of which were mainly Pakistani men. And, you never see Tommy Robinson leading demonstrations against white grooming gangs. You don't see people leading demonstrations against people who would kind of look like they're part of their own community. But look, it was the right thing to do because it was about calling out crime. And it's difficult to have those conversations because on the one hand, you're challenging, these criminals and the vile acts they're doing. And on the other hand, you've got the far right attacking you. So you're battling it out on all sides. It is not an easy position to have. And I guess the other caveat is I don't expect most people to be able to do that. That is normal as well. You can't expect ordinary people to also go out and kind of take attacks on all sides, especially because it is draining. It is difficult.
It's tiring.
Yeah. But if you have the bravery and if you have the strength, then that is the only way out. The only way is the middle path. It's the way of nuance, the way of justice. It's the way of the truth. It's about not taking sides and not swinging the pendulum to kind of breed kind of populism even further.
And then there's a responsibility, I suppose, on the wider community to support those people who are in those positions of power and authority, who can make those changes.
Sometimes internal conversations are difficult for any community, and that's where the challenge lies. But I think they're good people, and people will come out, and people see that as well when you challenge things from a brave perspective, and you make that difference. People recognize that. People actually hold that to a high degree and respect it as well.
You've done work over the years over community cohesion and integration, and it's clearly something you're incredibly passionate about. Fast forward years, you're then awarded an MBE, and the wider community is so proud of you. I was so proud of you.
Thank you.
And so excited for you as well. But then it starts. You're vilified by the far right, and you even have members of parliament speaking out against you. And it was Robert Jenrick, who's the Shadow Justice Secretary, who said Muhbeen Hussain has been caught red-handed calling for a Muslim boycott of the police in Rotherham. He should be stripped of his MBE and removed from his position on the APPG, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for British Muslims. His pernicious rants set back the community cohesion. His award is a sick joke on the British public. What on earth happened?
I think when you see somebody being a British Muslim in the public life, first and foremost, these things are expected. This is a sad reality that you have to face, and this is the nature of it. You don't find, senior previous cabinet members, people who are senior level of the shadow cabinet, actually comment on a piece like this. It's not really politically relevant to them, but you see that they're so engrossed into it, that they're so divulged into it, and it's because this is the reality that we face. And I can't say too much because, like I said previously, the legal teams are kind of assessing this. But I will say two or three things. The first thing I'll say is I think it was a mishap from them, because I think by attacking me on this level, it allowed people to see that, in fact, I have a record of challenging these crimes over a decade ago, when many of these people were either in government, many of these people were parliamentarians, and never said a word about it until it became politically kind of plausible and politically beneficial to say. So that's the first thing. The second is that, you know what, they're good. What I realize, there's good people out there. Because while some people, members of the shadow cabinet, decided to attack me, I saw that there were members of parliament, previous members of parliament, across the political spectrum, from Brexit leading conservatives to the ultra liberal and left socialists, people that came out in parliament, online, to actually come and defend me, because they knew who I was, they knew what I stood for, and they actually looked at the evidence and they looked at the work I did, and they knew that this was a complete witch hunt. This was kind of complete defamatory stuff that was being pushed out there. And the last thing I will say is that, look, these people can try, and these are kind of waves that people face. But if you stay true to yourself and you stay true to your values, you find that these kind of swings what happen in politics, they don't last very long, and people will embarrass themselves, because in a few years' time, I don't think that maybe I'm a bit more hopeful. I don't think that this right-wing kind of level of politics will stay as it is. It always happens. There's different spirals, and things swing one way and the other. And these people will look back at their record and they'll be embarrassed. And I think it's really embarrassing what some of these people did. And I think they'll look back and think, well, maybe they will, maybe they won't. What they did was quite awful. But it's a sad reality of being a British Muslim in the mainstream in politics. And this is something that we have to face, sadly.
Something I completely empathise with.
Of course.
Does that backlash fuel you, or do you sometimes just look at the state of the world and how you're treated and think, actually, I just don't want to do this anymore?
I think, look, good people, I keep saying this, that ordinary people have a right to say, look, I just don't want to do this. And I hear them, I understand this. One of the first things I did, and actually it helps me, give me a bit of motivation, and there's many other things as well, is that when I was 14 years old, there was a lady called Jill Hicks. She was a 7/7 survivor. She lost her legs in the 7/7 London bombings. and she has kind of like prosthetic legs, and she walked from Leeds to London. Leeds is where these vile terrorists and bombers came from, and she walked all the way from Leeds to London, and she stopped in the town I was born in, Rotherham, to actually bring communities together and say, you know, this isn't the whole picture. I think about her, and I'm still in contact with Jill, actually 20 years on. And I think it might be 20 years, but more than a decade on. And I sometimes think about this, and I think she lost her legs in the 7/7 bombings. Imagine the pain she has on a daily basis, the struggle she goes through from not being able to walk as she once were, the struggle of being a mother, struggle as a kind of ordinary person. But she didn't, for all this time, did not allow hate to overcome her. She still stands and says, look, bringing communities together, her message of peace, a message of unity. And if there was anybody who was to kind of hate Muslims or to kind of feel this way, it was somebody like Jill. And I find this across the spectrum, that this is the challenge we face. This is the burden we have. But this is something that we must do. And it is difficult. No one said it's easy. But, you know, throughout history, throughout life, it's good people and brave people that make a difference. And it's never easy.
I completely agree with you. I think often of the backlash I received when I was a member of Parliament, and one of the things that grounded me and kept me going was, yes, it's really, really difficult, but you know, inshallah, the next generation and the generation after that, even if it's a wee bit easier for them, then I'm happy to have taken on those challenges.
And it is tough. You faced it, and I think, especially the time that you came into politics, and especially even now, I think there's also a kind of atmosphere where it's okay to attack politicians, and it doesn't matter which spectrum you're from. And I think this is something that we as a society have to challenge. You know, people think that it's, you know, just into lazy narratives that every politician must be the same. And I spent my time kind of working and being around many of you guys in Parliament, and you know that, you know what, you can have difference of opinion, you can disagree vehemently many times, and we've seen this in debates. But you know what, deep down, people are good people, and there's lots to agree on as well. And I'm guessing you found that, right?
Oh, I completely agree. I find politicians are just vilified for, I'm not going to say no reason, but I think it's just a really lazy argument to say that all politicians are the same, or they're all self-serving. And my argument is always, if you want to attack me, or rather, if you want to challenge me for my opinions on Scottish independence, or why I think the Westminster establishment is not fit for purpose, I'm more than happy to engage in that debate, which I think you and I have had on occasion. Yeah. But when you start attacking me because of my faith and because of the colour of my skin, then you've essentially lost the argument.
Yeah,
and actually, I then don't want to engage with you because I can see that you can't look past the colour of my skin or my faith.
It's just, I think it comes down to having good faith arguments and bad faith. So if you're having them in good faith and you're ready to listen and ready to disagree, and even if you're not ready to change your mind, you're having them in good faith, there's a space for that. And there's always been a space for that. The problem is when you have them in bad faith, because your intention is never the debate or the discussion, but it's the person. It's a bit like in football. It's like you're not playing the ball, you're playing the player. You're playing the man. And that's not acceptable. You know, that's a foul. And the same in society, and the same in kind of politics. You have to play the argument and discussion, and that should be open. And we should have an open way of having those conversations as well, but not in bad faith.
It feels like, though, that those bad faith actors are elected members of Parliament who are in positions of power and authority.
I think sometimes people can, but I think the bigger challenge is when we have that bad faith arguments become acceptable in society. It's when, you know, certain things can be said on the media or said via think tanks or others and it becomes acceptable. It becomes a norm, and people don't challenge it. People don't say that actually this is unacceptable. And it's when it happens in society. And I think people sometimes kind of lynch everything or kind of link everything to Parliament and to parliamentarians, which is important. That is the place of power. That is the place of legislation. That is the seat of power, as you say it. But I think we have something called the Overton window, the kind of window of acceptability. And there are people who are, through media, through culture, through ideas, through think tanks, through policy work, are deliberately pushing this window to the right. And so what we find today in Parliament, it's not that we've got right-wing parliamentarians. Yes, we have many right-wing parliamentarians. But the level of acceptability of what is acceptable is on the right wing. And so when you've got the window which is shifted to the right, then that becomes the new norm. And so if you want to challenge and tackle the problem, it's not tackling, again, I would say many times the right-wing parliamentarians or those people who are playing to this right-wing agenda. It's about bringing that window back to the centre, back to the harmony, the kind of integration, the cohesive society that we are. It's about shifting that back. And how do you shift that back? I think that's about showing kind of your empathy, showing the best of British Muslims, showing the best of society, showing the contribution that people make. And it's those everyday conversations, because despite their challenges, they cannot convince somebody who has an everyday conversation with somebody on the school run or somebody on an everyday basis to convince them that their neighbour is a bad person if they've got those conversations and they've got those real life examples.
Are we ever going to get to a place where that is the norm again? Because it feels like the far right comments that people make, once upon a time, that was the fringes of society. You'd have to go to the far corners of the internet to find it. It is so normalised. If you go on social media, whether that's X or even if you're scrolling on TikTok, this type of language has become so normalised that it is a fear for many, not just Muslims, but many majority of people across Britain who are respectable citizens, who understand that Muslims are good people and part of the community. It feels like their voices aren't going to be heard, and we're never going to get back from this.
I think we? I think that is a fair question to have, and I think these are concerns that people have. People have for their children growing up in this country. Many British Muslims, people who have the wealth to do, are leaving this country. They're leaving for Dubai, they're leaving for Malaysia, they're leaving for other places in the world because they have the wealth to do so.
But the majority of British Muslims are not going to have that. They're not going to have that.
But I think, that concern is quite normal. People are worried. We've had 3 Muslim grandfathers murdered through terrorist attacks in this country. One in Birmingham, one in Rotherham, and one in Finsbury Park. We've seen most recently in a mosque in Peacehaven actually burnt, firebombed almost, down. We've seen a case where a young boy in Keighley, a teenager, was radicalized, wanting to dress up as a police officer and go into the mosques to live stream his kind of killings of British Muslims in the way that was done in Christchurch. We've seen a neo-Nazi group in Leeds where who actually based their name on Nazi death cults, and the leader called himself the Führer. And this guy wanted to cause, this group actually wanted to cause race riots in the UK by attacking Muslims in mosques and synagogues to kind of start a race riot. And they planned to actually kidnap an imam in Leeds and to torture him and murder him and everything else. And they amassed over 200 weapons. These were, ex-firearms, armed knives and crossbows and even a 3D printed gun. And this isn't the police. I think the judge actually said in conviction that this wasn't a fantasy. This is a ground reality. And we're seeing this across. You mentioned in Glasgow, we had a conversation about the mosque attack there, in Bristol, up and down the country, places of worship, Muslims, women wearing the hijab, people at school are facing this level of threat. So on one hand, it's normal to have that fear. The threat level is exceptional. If we're looking and thinking about a Christchurch level attack in the UK, the question is not if, the question is when it will happen. And that is the worry. But I think at the same time, and this is the bravery, this is the challenge, that we have to be hopeful. We have to fight back, but fight back with a better message, a message which personifies the message of the Prophet. I keep going back to this. It's not about having those difficult, challenging strategic kind of plans. Sometimes it's about the normal stuff in society. Be hopeful, have those conversations, because again, the vast majority of British people are good people. They're not people who kind of attend Tommy Robinson rallies and are influenced by this far-right rhetoric. They're good people who see you on a daily basis, and you can make that change and you can make that difference. Yes, there's a level for government to do. Yes, there's a position that we need to challenge and tackle, but also we need to play our role as ordinary day-to-day citizens, because that's the only way we kind of see a brighter future.
Is one of the challenges not, though, that Muslims are expected to perform? It feels like sometimes there's some sort of purity test or a level of performance to showcase that you're British enough.
I think, look, we've had these debates for years. I remember, over a decade ago, I used to have these debates actually on various TV channels actually about whether Muslims should even condemn acts of terror, because we, of course, condemn whether we should say it. And my position on all these things has been different. I know people might have different views, and people might say, well, I'm not going to go beyond and above, and I shouldn't have to. And I think that's a very fair assessment. We don't have to, be put to this test. But I think, and I keep going back to this, my message for my faith is that you go over and beyond. Ihsan in society is to be the best you can. And from the life and the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, every time people attacked him, every time people challenged him, he never responded with, well, I don't have to do this. He never responded with, I shouldn't be expected to do this. He always responded with something better and something more excellent. Whether it was on the streets of Medina or the streets of Mecca, we always saw he taught a greater message. And I think as British Muslims, we should take that message. We should own it. It is difficult. It's never been easy, but that's the path I kind of promote, and that's the kind of path I push. I respect people who say, you know what, I can't do that, and I think that's a very good position. That's an ordinary position to have, and I respect that. But it's not about having a tax on that you're right and you're wrong. It's just two different ways of doing it. I'm hell bent on thinking this way is the best way.
But what does that look like then? So is it waving the flag? I mean, I'm not going to be waving the Union flag. I'd always choose the soil tire.
Yeah.
I'm not going to start singing God Save the King. I'd always choose Flower of Scotland.
Yeah.
What does that integration look like then?
And I think, look, it's about firstly calling out what the kind of unlevel and unfair tests are, because nobody's saying that you got to go, act like you're some kind of puppet or a clown and just to kind of, prove your Britishness. I think that's also kind of hypocritical, and I think that shouldn't be the case. And I think, again, it's very difficult to have these conversations because people either say you're doing one or the other. Yeah. It's very difficult to have this nuanced argument. You're saying you're proud of your Scottish identity. You're very, very proud of it. And I think that's a normative position to have. I'm proud of, my British identity, and I think the kingdoms should stay united, and that's a different conversation entirely. But the point I'm trying to make is that we also have to have a conversation about whether we have the ability to have pride of our nation. Maybe something that we must speak more about. You go to places like Pakistan, all around the Middle East, and you find their national flag is everywhere. You find the national anthems sang everywhere, and it's normal. It's normal across the world. It's normal in the US. It's probably not a British thing to be really prideful in that way, and I can see that. But I think that there's a lot to be proud about in the United Kingdom. British values might not be defined, but you know what? This is a place we have our democratic rights, we have our freedoms, we have our liberty, we have lawlessness, we have a legal system that will protect you. We have a welfare state if you fall under that will protect you. We have a national health service that if you're ill that will give you care free at the point of need actually. So there's a lot of things that we have to be proud of, and I think people need to be able to speak about them in a positive way. And we need to be more open about it. This might be controversial, but I don't think it's helpful if when people are putting flags around and they're doing that, and some of these people are doing it in a hateful way, and that should be challenged, that you go and add a Pakistan flag underneath. I can see why people do the Palestinian flag, or people are doing flags in terms of a cause, but I don't see why you should put a Pakistan flag. And just a personal opinion, like we're living in Britain, and
I've not seen that.
It was a one-off occasion. My point, and again, it was exploited by bad faith actors. And people putting the flags up are doing it for multiple reasons. But look, we saw a mosque where somebody put the Union Jack outside as an attack against the mosque. They went and put it inside. Like, this is our flag too. And I think that's the kind of pride we should be echoing and emphasizing. And I think that's what most British Muslims and most British Pakistanis and South Asians and people of all cultures actually do.
I suppose the question is around nationalism, and what does nationalism look like? I quite often think of the Scottish nationalist argument. So I think it's a matter of public record and not a secret by any means that I was an SNP MP. I want independence for Scotland. My nationalism isn't rooted in ethnic nationalism, it's rooted in civic nationalism. The idea that regardless of where you're from, if you want to make Scotland your home, we're here for you. We want you to be part of our country and our culture. Is there a different way that people are looking at the British flag?
I think, look, there are wider debates, and look, it's right to say there are bad faith arguments and conversations on this, but there's also conversations that British Muslims are having on immigration across society. The people having conversations at the dinner table about immigration are not just kind of white English people, or what you would kind of say, working class communities, how it's often pit. These are Muslim communities in Bradford, in Newcastle, in all sorts of places having these conversations too.
I completely agree. The idea that immigration is just a concern of white working class communities is simply not the case, and there has to be a reasoned and rational debate around immigration. But again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. It feels like the space for nuanced debates just doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist, and you probably find this. I don't know how your podcast is going to end up, and because if you say one thing, people will say, "Well, you're on that side," and if you say another thing, you're on that side. And I think it's not about taking sides; it's about having balanced conversations. I think again, it goes back to simple life stuff. Like, for example, if you're living in a family and you're pushing change, if you don't give space for people to express their opinions in a safe and positive environment, then they do fall to the peripheries. We find this in politics, we find this in everyday life. If there's a family member who you keep shutting down, who has a genuine concern, after a bit they might not say it in the same way. This is life, right? And so there needs to be a conversation. I think there's nothing wrong with having a conversation on immigration. People feel as if it's too high. People feel like the Boris wave actually brought in too much migrants at a sharp level. There needs to be a conversation on whether the economy can actually last without immigration, because there's indicators that, for example, forecasts from the OBR wouldn't be so high and GDP would fall down, and all sorts of impacts on the economy if we didn't have high immigration, because we wouldn't have jobs filled and all these sorts of things. But we can't have it unless we're having it in a nuanced way. What is the impact on the economy? What is the impact on society? What is the impact in communities? Do communities feel like, for example, things are changing? And are we having those conversations so they feel rest assured, so they can have that sense that this is Britain and that Britain's not being taken away from them? Because bad faith actors are pushing this idea. They need to be supported in understanding it's not. And just saying, well, it's not always an answer. I think slogans in politics is quite common these days. And sadly, that's one of the problems we have, slogan politics.
It's so interesting because when I think of the debate around immigration, I obviously come to it with our Scottish perspective. We've got a declining birth rate, and the SNP Scottish Government has been on record to say that we need more immigration into Scotland. And again, this goes back to this idea that we just can't have a nuanced debate. Why can we not turn around and say, okay, if this part of the country is concerned about high levels of immigration, equally, we are part... not that I want to be, but we are part of this United Kingdom, and there's another part, we've got Scotland as a country that needs more immigration, but again, we just can't seem to have that nuanced debate.
Because I think one of the things is we've got to reclaim this stuff. We've got to reclaim the flag. We've got to reclaim the debates. We've got to reclaim our identity, and we've got to be proud of it. Because as soon as we kind of shy away from it, as soon as we say, well, we don't have to have this conversation, or we shouldn't have to have this conversation, you know what? The conversation and the dialogue is led by those people who, when they talk about immigration, aren't talking about immigrants from sometimes Europe or the US or Canada or Australia. They're talking about Muslims. Yeah. They're talking about brown people. They're talking about black people. They're talking about people from ethnic minority communities.
People that look a little bit different.
People that look a little bit different. But unless you reclaim that debate, unless you actually go and have that debate and have it with the full chest, as long as you hold that flag and say, actually, no, that British flag is our flag. It's the flag that Amir Khan fought for the Olympics, when he was the only British boxer in the Olympics fighting under the British flag. And then we had years of his success leading to people like Anthony Joshua and others coming through. It's that same flag that we have when people like 3 lines on the shirt that Moeen Ali and Adil Rashid are using in cricket. It's the flag that actually we are proud of and we hold forward. And reclaiming that debate and having it with an open chest so we can have it from a nuanced way. And again, I keep saying this, that's a difficult position to be in, but we have to fight back in a positive way, reclaim those debates and own those debates. And there are people who are willing to have that conversation and stand by people on that as well.
But it's so difficult to have those debates as well, so often. And again, I feel like a lot of the conversation today has been around lazy arguments. Yeah. Another lazy argument I think of is the idea that Muslims, or any community that looks a little bit different, to be honest, can't have or hold multiple views at one point. So one of the accusations that was levelled against me when I was elected was that I cared too much about Gaza. And I remember at some points being called the Member of Parliament for Gaza, which I just thought was absolutely bizarre, because that politics isn't about binary choices. It's not that I can only care about Gaza. I can care about genocide in Gaza just as much as I care about child poverty rates, just as much as I care about having a proper functioning NHS for people being able to get GP appointments. I can care about the genocide in Gaza just as much as I care people having access to good, clean housing that's safe for them. But it feels like that we just can't have that debate because it's pushed that it's a binary choice.
Yeah, I think, and again, it's across society. It's one of the things that I kind of feel most sad about, actually. Even in politics, I think when I first start to work within politics, you found, for example, political debates in Parliament were 15, 20 minutes. Now an average MP probably speaks for 3 minutes on a debate, and if it's a debate like the assisted dying debate, they might not even have an opportunity to speak. And so in those 3 minutes, that they know that they've got to push out an argument. So MPs are speaking to 3-minute slogans and 3-minute Instagram videos and Facebook videos to clip it for their constituents. That's across society. We're not looking at the depth of things. We're not looking at the kind of analysis. It's all being lost. And I think with the rise in AI, that'll just become worse, because there's a level of expertise that is needed. And that's why you take advice and look into the depths of things. And I think, look, exactly as you mentioned, when you look at protests of Gaza, it's always seen as a Muslim issue. But when I'm looking at the scenes and I'm looking at the protests, most people I see on demonstrations are not Muslim, or mostly white people from like different backgrounds, and people from all sides, and just ordinary British people who are coming out. People I see on the TV who are being arrested for supporting a Palestine action are usually people from Cambridgeshire, people who are 70, 80 years old. It's not the average Muslim that you would think. So, and I think it's lazy to kind of just pigeonhole things and put things into kind of boxes. But that's what's happening, and that's the challenge we've got to fight back with. And that takes dedication, it takes detail, it takes rigorous debate, and it takes actually depth in actually fighting back, because people don't even have the kind of brainwidth or kind of time to even listen to those debates. It's a real challenge we face.
It often feels like there's an oversimplification of the issues that Muslims care about. Like you've rightly just said, when you look at the Palestine protests, it's people who are rich or poor, old and young, different nationalities, different classes. It's just people who stand united against genocide. But there seems to be this idea of the Muslim vote, which I've never really understood, because Muslims are not a homogenous voting bloc. If we look at Muslim communities across the UK, there's not a singular, unique Muslim experience. We come from different ethnicities, we come from different classes. And actually, when we look at the stats, most British Muslims across the UK are from Pakistani or Bangladeshi communities. They're the most likely to live in deprivation. So the issues that are important to them are going to be the same issues that are important to any other working class community. Jobs, access to healthcare, access to good housing. But it does feel like there's an oversimplification of what Muslims care about.
I completely agree with you, and I think you've just hit the nail on the head in many ways when you say that. I think people are facing the same challenges. People are different. But there are also common lines, and I think sometimes when you find that there's kind of a flashpoint, that these types of groups do come about, these types of challenges come out. And I've been saying this probably in most debates, and I think it's not, the formula is quite similar in many things. When the pendulum swings in politics, or actually, in fact, I often say there's an exodus of leadership. And when you don't have leadership, and when that leadership that was meant to be transparent, was meant to be able to deliver and to provide for people and be authentic, when that leadership in the mainstream breaks away for all sorts of reasons, then people lose trust in the leadership that was actually out there for them, and turn to other means. They turn to people like the Andrew Tates of the world. They turn to people like Tommy Robinson's. They turn to people, as far as wide in politics. And that's what we're seeing today, is when you have a breakdown of leadership, and we have a breakdown in leadership. We don't have politicians who are, many of them good faith people who are not talking about the long-term issues in Parliament. We have Home Secretary after Home Secretary, Chancellor after Chancellor. Prime Minister comes and the next person is planning to be the next Prime Minister, ready to out them. We don't have a long-term vision in this country to tackle the issues we have, whether it is the National Health Service, whether it's the rising age of the population, whether it's falling birth rates, whether it's kind of the overburden on the welfare state. These are difficult questions, difficult challenges, and we need a long-term vision. And when that vision is not provided, when that aim isn't provided, then people look elsewhere for answers. Some people will fall to reform, some people will fall to independence, people will fall across the political spectrum. And that's why I think, whilst we need to bring those people back, it's about having that leadership in place that can provide them the understanding that change takes time, but also authenticity, transparency, and clear kind of guidance. If that isn't there, then people do fall to the periphery, and that's what we're seeing in British politics today, and to be honest, around the world.
the idea that there's an exodus of leadership is absolutely fascinating. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of Muslims across the UK feel politically homeless. Where do they go now? They don't have faith in the Conservative Party. That's been abundantly clear for years. They no longer have faith in the Labour Party. They're politically homeless. Where do they go? Is your party the answer?
I think you said that the Conservative Party has really turned away many Muslim voters, and I think this is a tragedy in many ways. I think the Conservative Party spends its time actually rejecting Muslims from actually joining their party. In fact, which would be a party where many people have previously supported and have been quite found their home. Especially in the 2010 Cameron era, when they actually won the election after Labour, they found that many British Muslims, people who were in business, in professions, actually felt like the Conservative Party was their home. And then you got the Labour Party, which is by and large being the home for Muslim communities in the UK, according to all kind of polling stats. And I think there is a challenge to say, look, feeling a home, and there's two sides to this. One is that there's political parties who have neglected communities of all kinds, and I often say to people, it's not about representing Muslims when it comes to attending the mosque or in Ramadan or Eid or when you're at a Muslim event. It's about representing communities across these issues, from the National Health Service to education, to the deprivation that they face, to the actually opportunities they have uniquely in their communities from business and everything else. It's about having that kind of connection into political parties, which political parties have neglected. And that's why you're seeing people move to the periphery. But I don't think the answer is in the periphery. I think the more people fall to these, populist parties, move to the right, we're just going to see that these hopes that they believe in are just not going to come true, and we're going to be in a far worse position in the end, because the reality is, look, there might be good people, there might be good-hearted people. You just cannot have a party of, like your party or independence actually exist in a political system like ours, and people can say it does, but I don't think it's the same as reform in many ways, and I think that model hasn't been achieved, and I think the left in many ways are going to struggle with it.
Is the wider question then not necessarily around supporting different political parties, but actually taking a step back and changing the way Westminster operates and moving away from that first past the post system to a more proportional representation system? Because people are going to be at the periphery. People have been let down by political party after political party, after government, and that's all across the UK. More often than not, we do see politicians go to masjids or synagogues or gurdwaras at election time or for Eid or for different celebrations, rather than consistently represent them. So does it not make sense that they're then going to go to the fringe movements, both to the right and the left?
I think, you mentioned proportional representation. I remember, I think the AV and the PR vote was the first ever vote I got to do in the UK growing up. I think I was just under 18. I think I was 17 at the time or 16 when the vote came. I think you were allowed to be, or whatever it was. I remember it was my first ever vote. But at the same time, the Lib Dems had actually gone back on their pledge of student fees. I hadn't actually reached university then, but I was going to be impacted by them. And out of protest, I actually voted against AV and PR at the time, because I was annoyed at the fact that this leadership that said they would do something on a major issue didn't do it. And it goes back to the fact, if you're not authentic and you're not kind of holding up to your words and values, then people will kind of go against it, even if you believe in it. And I think, people like the SNP and the Lib Dems need to make a much more bigger argument as for PR, because right now it's not even on the cards, if I'll be honest, in Westminster or in the mainstream debate. I think a lot more conversation needs to happen on that and the impact of it. I don't know whether it's the right opinion right now. But one thing I would say is, again, there's the reality of mainstream politicians and parliamentarians actually reaching out and having meaningful engagement and having meaningful representation. Some of that which is happening to some level. But it's also about asking ourselves, where does change happen? And I tell you, change does not happen on the peripheries. You can have one independent MP, you can have 5 independent MPs, you can have 30 independent MPs. If you want to recognize the state of Palestine, it happens from an elected government. If you want to make mass change, it happens from an elected government. It does not happen from parties on the periphery. And in fact, there are people who demonize Muslims, who attack Muslims, who defame them like myself, who very much would like us to be on the peripheries. They do not like us on the mainstream. That is what they want. They do not want us to engage in the mainstream. And that's what they're deliberately doing. And if we actually fall to that trap and we also push ourselves to the peripheries and say this is the only answer, then I think we're losing out. It's a different thing to say it's a pressure tactic, it's a protest vote. I think people are rightful to be angry, to choose other avenues, and that's a fair thing to say. But to say that's the only option, I think that would be putting forward a very losing trade, a very silly trade. Nobody trades their finances with just emotions. I think it'll be a strategic loss for our community and for society as a whole.
Who benefits from othering Muslims?
Well, society doesn't. And that's the main thing. Society doesn't. Community cohesion doesn't. Our economy doesn't. Muslims contribute more than £70 billion to our economy. I think just in Ramadan alone, it's £1 billion. 4 times the average for the UK in charitable giving. It's not our National Health Service that has British Muslims as nurses, as doctors, all across the system. It's not the teachers in our education system that has British Muslims providing in our society. It's not our economy. It's not our society. It's not our culture, our arts. It's definitely not society. Who benefits? Maybe those people who have that, hatred towards certain people and are willing to risk it all for their kind of benefit. Maybe those who've got billions of pounds and can spew hatred for free. Maybe it's those people, but it definitely doesn't benefit our society. It will not benefit Britain, and that's why we've got to stand up, not just as Muslims but as communities, to challenge all types of hatred. Because in the end, it breaks down the best of our society. It doesn't lead to positive contribution, positive gain, or net good.
There's a generation of young Muslims who are now more politically active than ever before and politically engaged. Actually, when I take a step back, I think there's been some key moments in the lives of Muslims growing up when I was growing up, and I think it's not too dissimilar to you. It was 9/11 that really shaped us. It was then 7/7, and for this generation of Muslim now, it's the genocide that's happening in Gaza post October the 7th. They're seeing a government complicit in genocide that continues to sell arms to Israel, and they're politically engaged, but also they're politically disappointed. If you could say something to them to give them that motivation to remain in politics, to remain politically active, what would you say to them?
I think more than anything else, I think people are traumatized. People are watching on a daily basis of children dying, seeing their own family members, their own children, and kind of saying, how can this happen in society? And sometimes there's not an answer to how we can prevent this and how we can stop this. And I think this is where faith comes in, actually, because faith tells you that not everything is in your control. You play your part and you have your role to play. And what I would say to them is that, look, we have to think about the long-term vision and the long-term goal. It's not, as a young person, it often feels like it's now or never. And I think that's short-termism. It won't help you. It won't help society. It won't help our community in many ways. And we have to think about long-term goals. Sadly, the tragedy that's happening will hopefully end. Things will move on. There will be more tragedies, sadly, throughout society. And you have to realize, and in fact, it goes back to a separate point, which I wish I had mentioned earlier, that you have to know your place and you have to know what you can physically do and be content with that. I sometimes see people who can barely change the local mosque committee or make changes in their mosque, but they are so engrossed into how they can make changes at the United Nations on a geopolitical level. Know where you are, know your ability. You are judged on what you can do. You're judged on what your actions are and your ability around you. And that's to be the best you can. And I think you have to do that. Be the best you can, and that's all Allah Almighty, the Prophet ﷺ, and society asks from you. And don't go out to be taking on international states and everything else, because it's not within your power to do so. And that's sad, it's difficult, it's traumatizing, and people feel your pain. But think things, inshallah, will get better, things will move forward, and you will make your mark in many ways.
And I think the other thing I would add to that is surround yourself with good people, because politics can be really isolating. And not to publicly embarrass you, but I actually think of my time in politics, and some of the most meaningful times is when you and I would sit in Portcullis House over a cup of coffee and catch up. Even though we're from two very different political parties, we very much disagree on the future of Scotland. We were able to put aside those political differences and have conversations around the big picture stuff.
I think just to add one more thing, actually, is sometimes when we're engrossed in things that we have no control over, we're actually missing out on making a mark in things we have an opportunity to make a difference. You can make a difference in society. You can volunteer in your local community. You can make a mark in society that people can remember. I know there's elders in community, when they leave their mark, you said this person did this for society, in their local community, in their village, in their town, in their city, in their society. They didn't go and free Palestine or, end the war in Iraq or make these massive changes, but they made their mark. But if you're engrossed in international changes where you can't make a difference, and you're losing that time to make a difference to people's lives around you in your society, then you're missing out and you're losing out. And I'd say don't miss that opportunity. Make your mark.
Before we wrap up, we've got our final section, which is That's My Cup of Tea. So it's a quick fire, listener that round. Don't think too much.
I'm really awful with this, so let's go for it.
What are you currently reading?
A book called The Compass of Being by Sheikh Hamad Mustafa Al-Madani Al-Qadri. It's actually quite an interesting book about finding your purpose in life and finding meaning. Really interesting book.
What's your go-to comfort food?
I'll probably have to be a pizza. Definitely a pizza.
Not an aloo paratha?
No, actually, I do make nice keema naans actually, but that's for a different day.
Do you prefer tea or coffee?
Coffee in the morning, tea in the evening.
What's the best method of pushing for political change?
Honestly, genuinely being the best best person you can be, and making change on the grassroots. It's all about grassroots change and showing a positive image, and changing that Overton window, as I keep saying.
You have been through an incredible journey and you've received a lot of backlash as well. What's something that grounds you? Have you got a favourite quote or something that you'll go to read to give you that comfort?
I think I've got good people around me, people who will motivate you. I think good company more than anything else overdoes words and kind of quotes for me.
Muhbeen, this podcast is unfiltered, unapologetic and disruptive. So for the final sip, we're going to go a little bit wider than just politics, because the reality is that not every young person is going to end up in frontline politics. What other ways are there to contribute to making meaningful change?
I think, again, having a purpose in life. I think if you've got a purpose in life and you are ready to make a change, then you don't have to make it in politics. We know throughout history, whether it's been people like Fatima Al-Fidi, who set up the first, university, people like, Isaac Newton. These people didn't work in politics, but they left a lasting change in society. People like the Wright brothers that helped, aviation. There's people like Malcolm X and others, but they're politics based. Do the best you can. Have a meaning in life, and know that you're on this life for a very short time, and you have to make your mark. Don't live day by day just kind of eating, drinking and watching Netflix and kind of indulged in social media as if you're going to change the world from your phone. Make that change, get up and do something, and you will actually realize that you've done something. So that's an argument. Whatever you do, believe in it, have a purpose, and go full throttle ahead.
Thank you so much, Muhbeen, for joining us today.
Thank you, Anum. Good pleasure to be here.
And that was Muhbeen Hussain MBE talking about politics and identity. Thank you so much, Muhbeen, for joining me and spilling the tea on people, power and politics. Now I want to hear from you. Do you feel politically homeless? Does it feel like your loyalty to Britain is conditional? Or like me, do you actually reject the idea of being British because I'm proudly Scottish? Does that make a difference? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this episode, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss our next episode of DemocraTEA, where we spill the tea on people, power and politics.